Okay.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and a huge welcome to Dr. Tina Ray. Really looking forward to finding out about your Toolbox of Wellbeing journal, your new publication, and everything in there. So thank you, Tina.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And sorry for the delayed start. Welcome, everybody. This presentation, in essence, is not just simply about my new publication. Let me just caveat that, because what I wanted to do this evening was to talk about journaling and why it is so good for our mental health. And it's probably a really good opportune time to do that, given that it's the beginning of the year when everyone seems to be thinking about resolutions and making changes and setting goals, etc., etc. I also want to say at the outset that I never, ever make resolutions, because January is usually very dull and grey, and everyone makes lots of resolutions which they break within 2 or 3 weeks, because they need to eat comfort food, they need to do things that make them feel better very, very quickly. So I actually make my resolutions in August when it's nice and sunny, just so I'll talk a bit more about that later. But anyway, journaling. What I want to do is think about why we need to maintain our well-being using tools from positive psychology. And journaling, for me, as a positive psychologist, really does and is underpinned by positive psychology approaches, looking for the best, looking for what's good, building on strengths and building on our character strengths. And I think there's a huge amount of evidence for journaling and the way in which it protects and increases our well-being overall. So I'm going to just flag up a few wee bits of that so that you can see why there is, you know, some real good reasons as to why we should engage in this kind of practice. And I'm going to highlight as well a few very simple strategies and very simple ways that if you haven't journaled before, you can begin to undertake this kind of process. I'm going to flag up some of the ways in which I personally use expressive writing. And also, for those of you who are professionals, who are psychologists, you will obviously know, all of you will have had to have kept a reflective log or journal as you went through your training. And I actually am a great believer in maintaining that practice throughout your working life. So I will come on to that in a wee bit more detail too. So, I mean, at the moment, I think what we're all into and what we all need is to really focus on levels of self-care, because everyone, I haven't met anyone who's not stressed. I haven't met anyone who's not worried about Omicron, who's working in schools where there is a huge amount of pressure and a huge amount of sickness and illness, and things are just up in the air again. And this is becoming the kind of norm per se for many of us. So it's very, very important. The current context for us, we know what our children have missed in the last couple of years: creativity, relaxation, being with their friends, feeling safe, actually feeling nurtured, those relationships, notwithstanding the academic stuff. I actually think the emotional stuff is far more important, and we should just park that academic catch-up narrative for now, personally. But if you look at that list, I would really genuinely say that many of us as adults have also missed a lot of this stuff. A lot of this stuff that makes us feel good, that makes us feel well, that makes us feel better about ourselves. Ruth Suarez, whom I respect enormously, does a lot of blogging. And she did a wonderful piece in November where she talked about how the impact of COVID-19 was still very, very prevalent in schools. And for the last 20 months for her, she's been speaking to many, many teachers, and they've been talking about the challenges that they and the families are facing as a result of COVID. And it is things like grief, bereavement, stress, poverty, etc., etc. And that's apart from the gaps in learning. And I think it's really, really important. I'm very glad at the moment, and this is a political statement, but I'm quite happy to make them. And I think it's important that Ofsted have just said they're not going to go into schools, haven't they, for a couple of weeks? Marvellous. Maybe they should go in and do a bit of teaching. I think as well, positive psychology for me is hugely important. Looking after ourselves in the right way, building ourselves up in the right way, learning to be more resilient and managing things effectively, because we don't just leave stress behind. It's not about just being happy all the time. That's impossible. And that's not what positive psychology is about. This is about living a life of meaning and living a life in which you really are your best self. And I think journaling can help us to be our best selves. Positive psychology for me is full of what I call happiness boosters. And we know our brain grows like a muscle, and we can grow our brains. We know this from all the stuff on growth mindset. So things like expressing gratitude is part of journaling. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. But all of these things here, exercising, volunteering, surrounding ourselves with happy memories, good people, giving ourselves forgiveness and showing compassion to ourselves and others, engaging in 3 kind acts, remembering 3 kind things every day. All of this stuff is what we can actually include in our journaling. And journaling for me is a ritual, and it's a healthy, happy ritual that I engage in. So there are lots of things, obviously, that we can all be doing and doing more of. But actually, once we start journaling, it becomes far more apparent the kind of things that we're not doing and we perhaps need to do a wee bit more of. So lots and lots of research over the last 20 years in particular as to why journaling is good for our well-being. The problem is that, particularly in the American literature, the researchers very often don't talk about their interventions as journaling or keeping a diary. They would talk about setting implementation intentions or engaging in expressive writing. So when you Google this or you try and do some research into the evidence base, sometimes you'll miss things. But I think it's really, really important. One of the key seminal pieces of research was this seminal paper. It was published in 2003 by Robert Emmons and Michael McCulloch. And this was in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. And they talked about how keeping a gratitude journal, so three or more or 20 things, whatever it is that I'm grateful for each day, can really make an improvement to our mood. And we know this from the work that they undertook at Harvard University in the area of positive psychology. So the effects of gratitude, being more mindful of the positive, is really, really important. And this is vital because these practices vary a wee bit, but if you just write down every day anything from sort of 2 to 10 things, or from 2 to 10 weeks, sorry, on a daily basis, and you can have as many things as you want. I tend to do 3 or 4, but they can be tiny things. And I think it's important because it's too easy for us to focus on the negatives, and particularly in the current context. So I think what this helps us to do, the kind of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, whatever it is, good things that you write down that you're grateful for, can really help us to hack into the brain, helping us to be much more mindful, conscious and aware of the positive. And there also, for me, is this power of expressive writing, which I think is very, very important. And some of the research shows some quite dramatic results. There is one study published in 2013 in the Psychosomatic Medicine Journal, where they showed that this notion of expressive writing, the form of journaling called expressive writing, could help even in healing physical wounds, even though they were just small ones. Okay, so they asked healthy adults aged 64 to 97 to journal for 20 minutes a day, 3 days in a row. But there were 2 different practices going on here. Half the participants were asked to write about things that upset them, made them feel sad or unhappy. And the others talked about a much drier topic, how they managed their time during the day. So how I managed what I was doing during the day. So what was interesting was that after they had done this for 3 days and engaged in the journaling, they tracked how well this small wound that they made, and it was a tiny biopsy in each person's arm. Obviously, they gave permission for this. This was all ethical. But they tracked and they actually looked at how well that wound healed by taking a picture every day. And by day 11, a full 76% of the group who wrote the more genuine journal of the things that actually had upset them during the day, thinking about how they felt and thought about those events, etc., they had healed 76%, but just 42% of those that wrote about the time management had actually healed. So how and what we write actually really does matter. Not all journaling is equal. Okay, so there's very little evidence that just spilling our minds onto a blank page does very much good. Okay, there might be a cathartic release there, but I think it's really, really important about how we do this. So what we write about and how we write really does seem to matter. And this is important because for me, I know from the research, but also from my own practice, that journals help with anxiety. Okay, so when we write about something that's happening to us, it can somehow just make it that bit easier to make sense of things, okay? If we look back at our journal and we find we keep writing about that same thing, that same situation, that same individual, that same classroom, that same context, whatever it is that's making us unhappy, isn't that giving us a clue that maybe we need to ask or seek some additional help? We need to perhaps think differently ourselves, but we need to also maybe seek support elsewhere. And I think this is important because our feelings, they're not always facts. We don't always get it right. What we feel is not always a truth, but also they're complicated. Writing them down can just help us to unpick some of those knots. So when you're younger, I mean, this is how I got into it. For me, I had a secret journal. Journals could keep my secrets, and I could tell the journal everything I thought and felt. And that was very, very powerful for me. So you might want to get a lockable diary, which is what we were all given as children. My first diary was in, believe it or not, 1966 when I was 5. It was wonderful. I used to draw and just write wee mini captions and things, but it's very, very important. If we think about these diaries from when we were smaller, we can have some very happy memories. We can maybe have some sad memories, but we can reflect on what our childhoods were like. And we can get ourselves back into those lovely situations that we may have found ourselves in. So it's a bit like anchoring. It's a bit like going back to a place that we loved and we felt comfortable in. If I wrote about it, I can reread it and then envisage myself being back in that lovely, special, calming place, etc. So quite important on that level. These can be, in my view, a gift to us. So as I said earlier, when we're older, we might look back and think, what did we write about? Wouldn't that be interesting to share it maybe with grandchildren, with our own children, some of those bits that maybe we thought we could share? I have my diaries from right through from the age of about 14. And one of the reasons I kept them was that my adolescence was so painful. And I was one of those teenagers, like many that I know now, who found it really difficult. So it's full of stuff about how much I hated my body. I looked ugly. I wasn't as clever or beautiful as the other girls. I would never have a relationship because no one would want me because I was far too tall, etc., etc. But my anxieties and my fears, I can somehow read back and I can have a wry smile, but actually I can still feel the pain, the utter pain of what it was like to be a teenager. And it was hard. And I think that there's no getting away from it. People say, man up. They use that phrase a lot. They say, you've got to sort yourself out. And I think, yes, you have. But, sometimes we all need a wee bit of help to do that from other people and from within ourselves in the way in which we approach our lives, in the way in which we learn how to engage more positively in positive psychology practice, such as journaling. So where to start? If someone asks me, where can I start, Miss? They usually call me Miss. Where can I start? I just want to have a go at doing this now you've talked about it. I always say, have a gratitude journal to begin with, because it's really, really important. It doesn't really bring about dramatic changes, mainly it doesn't, but I think it's really, really important that these little bits, these little nuggets, these golden moments in our lives that we record as being grateful for can really build up the endorphins gradually over time, particularly if we make this a regular practice. So how to do it? We can buy the notebooks, we can buy journals which have a page for each day. We can buy particular special books or resources such as mine, the Wellbeing Toolbox of Wellbeing Journal. Again, this is useful because I think if you haven't journaled before, what it does give you is a framework to begin, and it gives you models of how you might want to further develop alongside a whole range of different strategies to build your well-being. So I think that's important. You might want to do this online in digital form, but be careful around how you actually maintain confidentiality with that. So it's a lovely way to be creative. It's a lovely way to doodle, to build up your creative side too. And of course, we know there's a huge amount of research out there to show how creativity, how engaging in creativity can actually support and foster our well-being. Vital on a daily basis is necessary, in my view. So giving structure and tools is important. So why I have highlighted my own publication is not just simply to push it out there and say, look at what I've done, but it's to say I did this as an absolute labour of love last year. because for me, I was doing a lot more journaling, a lot more drawing, a lot more writing, painting, creative stuff, because it was lockdowns. It was a really kind of difficult time, and this is what kept me going. And I wanted to share some of the activities and strategies that I use within that toolbox of wellbeing journal, so that if young people pick this up, it really does help them. I hope. I've had some good feedback from it. What I've done here, and this is from the introduction, is to include activities such as self-regulation, calming, grounding, reframing negative thoughts, engaging in creativity and flow, etc. And also lots of inspirational quotes, affirmations, mindfulness activities, and a great deal of colouring and doodling. So most of this, well, it's all my own drawings actually here. So, and I think this is important, and I'm going to talk about the real evident power that there is in colouring in, dare I say. People call it mindful colouring. I know it's mindful colouring, but I love using the phrase colouring in. So mindful colouring or colouring in. Why is this so useful? The action of colouring focuses our brains. It blocks out unpleasant experiences, and it gives us a chance just to take that wee step back from the kind of muddle, the chaos, that busy brain, I call it. And I think that's very important, because you're very aware of that pencil, you know, or maybe you're going to colour in using watercolours, whatever it is, but it's there. You're thinking about the shades, the paper, you're feeling that. And it almost becomes something where you experience that sense of flow, because it's effortless, it's enjoyable. You don't actually have to think, and not thinking sometimes is really, really healthy for us, in my view. Stop the over buzzing brain. Okay, so very important. It's that kind of level of repeating. Our brain likes this repeating mechanism in order to be able to relax, and we know this from the neuroscience. So in essence, colouring in is very good for you, which is why in my wee journal I've included my own drawings to colour and doodle. And I can assure you that very often I was drawing these, and I'd get to the end of an evening, and I maybe did one an evening for, I think I did them for a couple of months. And at the end of doing a drawing, I have to say, my mind was clear. Okay, things popped back in straight away afterwards. I mean, you know, clearly this is something you have to keep practicing, but it's very important. So I'm hoping people really enjoy colouring these in and actually get some kind of benefit from the key messages that the drawings, because most of them have got some kind of key messages that those messages give them. So when I'm thinking about us as the grown-ups, the adults, the professionals, as you may like to call us, I think it's really important, this notion that we develop as reflective practitioners. We plan, so we reflect for action, we reflect in action, we reflect on what we're doing, and then we review. So this plan, do, review cycle, very, very important. And kind of reflective logs for me are a mainstay of my professional working life. Sometimes you might want to use a framework for this. So, you know, identifying hair-raising moments. What were the moments that made you think, wow, today? What shocked you? What weren't you expecting? What gave you goosebumps? Or heartwarming moments? What went well? As Adrian Bethune says, what made you feel good about your work practice? What are you proud of? Tummy sinking moments where you thought, oh no, it just didn't go right. Or toe curling ones where you could just, melt into the floor, or please let the wall suddenly suck me in, as I felt at the start of this presentation tonight when I could not get the computer to work. There you go, it happens to everybody. Or the roller coaster. So again, reflection. Before you get on the ride, what are you expecting? Are you apprehensive? How are you feeling about that? I jot this down. During the ride, how does it feel? Do you want to get off? Is it too painful? After the ride, how do you feel? What was it like? Power. Who put you on the ride? Did you have any choices about that? I found this quite useful when I was training to be a psychologist. The weather model. Sometimes this is a good one. Thinking about this today. Sunshine, what went well? What felt really good? What made me happy? Rain, what didn't go so well? Lightning, what came as a shock? Fog, where did you get lost? What couldn't you see? Why? Why was that going on? Or the cake model. Preparation, what ingredients have you got? What recipe are you using? How are you feeling about making the cake? This might be, how are you feeling about delivering that lesson? How are you feeling about going into that classroom today, about taking that test, etc.? Making the cake, did you follow the recipe? Did you add any spice, something different, special, unique to you? Did you make a mess? If so, how did you tidy it up? When you digest the cake, did you burn your fingers? Did you share it? Did it sink or did it rise? What did it taste like? If you change the ingredients, would it have tasted the same? Did you cater for all tastes? What was the icing on the cake? I think the cake model is rather a good one if you are a teacher myself. And then, of course, there's Gibbs' reflective learning cycle, which is what we always used to present to our students when I was a tutor at the University of East London, part of when we used to have our professional support groups. I think this is really important. Description. It's a good framework. What actually happened today? What happened? What were my feelings about it during and after it happened? Okay, but during that, whatever that activity was, what was I thinking and feeling? How am I evaluating it? Was this a good or bad experience? And then analysing it. The analysis is really important. What sense can you make of it? And conclusion. What else could you have done? And then action plan. This is really important. The whole point of reflection is that you reflect, you work out what went well and what didn't go so well, and then you think about what you might do differently next time. So in essence, again, it's solution focused. And I would make my action plan. If it were to happen again, what would you do? And there are lots of methods of reflection, and reflection narratives are really important. These are really a story of an experience or an event. So that's what a narrative is. And you always write it in the first person. Okay, I went to my mum's today. I saw that her leg was hurting, and I realized again that her ulcers are starting to burst. So I called the nurse out, etc., etc. Okay, and it's how I felt about it, what I did, the way in which the medics responded, which was absolutely brilliant, etc., etc. Sorry, this is true, by the way, but written in the first person. But I think it's important because it's learner-centered, okay? It fits in my voice or your voice. It helps us to make that link between personal and professional development. And I would then be sharing this with my supervisor. I would be sharing, if I was a child or young person or teen, with an adult who could help me make sense of it. An activity that you can do, we obviously can't do it this evening, we don't have time, but this is what I'd like you to take away, alongside another one at the end, is to actually just have a go at focused free write. So you just start from an incident, experience or process that you want to reflect on. And then you just write for 5 to 15 minutes, however long you can manage, without stopping, not worrying about spelling, punctuation, any of that stuff. Doesn't matter about spelling and punctuation, etc. You just write. So very, very important. It doesn't matter if you go off the topic, etc. But then what you do at the end is just skim through, go back, and then just think, highlight any useful, interesting words, phrases, ideas, or thoughts. It's a way of beginning to help you, support you to reflect on an event. The journal. That focuses the reflective journal on your reaction to the event, different ways you might look at it, how it links to other experiences you may have had, also how you understand what happened to you in the light of any theories. So, for example, we always talk about theoretical perspectives theory, and that's important. You know, where does this fit with that particular theory? What have you learned? What do you need to learn? What do you need to learn? What do you need to do next? And how might you achieve those identified learning goals? So it's a structure. Again, at the time, this is just a format for it. A description, your feelings, anything you might want to refer to as evidence, questions or things you might want to explore if they occur. Then you look back later objectively and compare you now with then. This is why it's so important to go back and have the later reflection. And you ask and answer critical questions. You relate it to the wider context and justify what you say. This is about learning and moving forward. So that's why it's so important, writing it down at the time, in the moment, including feelings, evidence, and questions, things you might want to explore more, concerns you have, things that you are curious about. So, summarising the rationale for starting to journal and for, in particular, my development of my toolbox of wellbeing journal. It can and does improve our mental health and well-being, okay? But it's like anything else that's a mental health good practice. We have to keep doing it, okay? It's like CBT. I need to keep using my skills and honing them, okay? It can help us to record and savour special moments, which is something that we do if we're positive psychologists. It can help us to manage or reduce stress levels because we recognize our anxieties and we try to challenge our negative automatic thoughts and things that are not real, that are not actually accurate. It can improve our confidence and self-esteem because we can use affirmations. Okay, it can help us to build social connections because we can go and talk to people about what we've written, why we've written the stuff we have, when we've got a problem, when we recognize that we're writing the same thing and we're stuck and we need to move on. And it can support us in really processing those problems, those negative feelings or experiences. So there's a very clear rationale as to why journaling is so healthy and good for us. Ultimately, I think all of us need to think and behave in a more positive and optimistic way. And I think journaling can absolutely support us in this. Most of us want to be more optimistic, more positive, and it's hard at the moment, very hard. We're continuing to have to navigate this pandemic and the current Omicron crisis, I call it at the moment. And I think it's important. We need to start to identify areas to change, but don't make big goals. That's impossible at the moment. I'm really talking all the time now about small steps. So really starting small, things I want to improve on, things I want to change, things I want to build on. And then just checking ourselves during the day, stopping and thinking, how am I thinking? Are my thoughts negative all the time? I need to kind of try and reframe those and challenge them. I also need to be open to humour. We've got to give ourselves permission to smile, to laugh, particularly when things are hard. And that's really difficult sometimes. But when we're journaling, we can write those things, those funny little moments down. We can record them and save them. We feel less stress. It's the endorphin factor that laughter brings us. Following a healthy lifestyle, absolutely, that's a given, isn't it? You know, even when it's raining, I go out. In lockdown, I went out for at least an hour a day. Buttoned up to the hilt, but just to actually walk, to get out and to get out in nature. I think Socrates said, you know, go out and walk if you feel down when you get up. If you feel down when you get back, go out and do some more walking and keep going until you actually get that level of endorphin you need. But I don't think it always has to be so big. Even 10-minute chunks of time during the day where we actually stretch, we do something a wee bit different. And surrounding ourselves with positive people is probably something that I'm very, very passionate about. This is so important. We need very much now to let go of those relationships that are not healthy, that are not supportive, that are not nurturing. And we need to give way, I think, sometimes when we don't feel that we're giving that nurture to others. We need to really question ourselves. It's so important. And practicing positive self-talk for me remains an absolute essential. Okay, don't say anything to yourself you wouldn't say to anyone else. We've got to be gentle and encouraging. We've got to show ourselves as much compassion as we show the children and young people that we work with, and really respond much more rationally to those negative thoughts, challenging them. We don't get it right. What we think, our thoughts are not always facts. And it's the biggest lesson I wish someone had taught me when I was about 10 years of age. Your thoughts are not always facts. You don't get it right. Okay, it's not always that bad. And let's challenge it. Let's look for the evidence. The lovely thing about journaling is in all of those 6 areas, you can record progress in your journal. So a wee takeaway activity that I think maybe you want to think about this evening, maybe we can talk a wee bit about it now. Very, very important just to think about that goal for yourself now in relation to your own happiness. And this is hard at the moment for many of us. And when I say goal, I mean a really small thing, you know, not this great big thing up there that we can't achieve, but identifying, you know, how am I going to get there? What do I need to do now, tomorrow, next week, over this coming year? And what strategies can I use from positive psychology? Okay, can I use my gratitude diary? Can I actually think about cognitive reframing, engaging in more positive thinking, challenging negative thoughts? Can I do more exercise? Can I do 3 kind acts a day? Can I show more gratitude? Can I be supportive of others? Can I volunteer? Can I actually engage more in pro-social activities, etc., etc.? Very important, something to go away and reflect on. And then finally, how will you start or further develop your journaling life? If you're not someone who journals at the moment, maybe have a wee think about this. Is it something that perhaps could support your well-being and further nurture you as a human being to lead what I think is what we all want, is really the most meaningful lives possible? So thank you very, very much for listening to that. That was a whistle-stop tour. So I hope that's okay. Thank you.